She was 20 the first time she looked at me like I was not just her teacher. And I was 35 the first time I hated myself for noticing. If you want the clean version of this story, I cannot give it to you. If you want the version where everything was innocent, beautiful, and easy, that does not exist either. What I can give you is the truth. The truth is that I was careful for most of my life. Careful with my words. Careful with my clothes. Careful with my heart. Careful with every line I was told never to cross. I was a mathematics teacher in a quiet town where people noticed everything. They noticed who arrived late to church, who bought cheap wine on Tuesdays, who parked outside whose house after dark, who smiled too long, who did not wear a wedding ring anymore, who looked tired, who looked guilty. And in a town like that, a woman like me survived by being unremarkable. My name is Eliza Rowan. I was 35 years old, unmarried, and known for 3 things. My classes were difficult, my handwriting on the board was perfectly straight, and I never gave anyone a reason to talk. At least not at first. The school sat at the edge of town, just beyond a row of maple trees and a narrow football field that turned gold every October. It was not a grand place. Red brick, fading paint, hallways that smelled like old paper, floor polish, and damp coats in the winter. But it was my place. My room had tall windows on the eastern side, 6 rows of desks, 1 scarred wooden podium, and a board that I cleaned so often my hands were always dusty by the end of the day. I loved mathematics because numbers were honest. People lied. Faces lied, promises lied, but numbers did not. 2 plus 2 never woke up confused. A formula never claimed it loved you and then disappeared. A theorem never asked you to wait while it built another life somewhere else. Numbers were clean. Life was not. And then he walked into my classroom on a gray Monday morning at the start of the spring term. His name was Noah Vale. He was a transfer student, 20 years old. Older than most in the class because he had lost a year after a long illness. Or so the office files said. He had dark blonde hair that never stayed neatly in place, blue eyes that looked too direct for someone his age, and the quiet kind of confidence that made stillness feel like presence. He sat in the front row, not because there were no seats in the back, because he chose to. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that he listened. Really listened. Not the way students pretend to listen while waiting for the bell. Not the glazed politeness of teenagers trapped in a room they did not choose. He watched the board, watched my hands, watched the movement of equations as if the shape of a proof mattered to him. When I asked a question about limits, his hand rose. When I gave a problem nobody else could solve cleanly, he stayed after the others left and asked to see the alternative method. When I explained something, he smiled like the answer had given him genuine pleasure. That smile stayed with me longer than it should have. I told myself it was harmless. Teachers appreciate good students. Teachers notice intelligence. Teachers enjoy curiosity. All true, but truth can hide inside larger truths and wear their face until you are already in danger. The first time we were alone, it was after class on a rainy afternoon. The room was nearly dark because the storm had swallowed most of the daylight. Students had rushed out in loud, careless groups, leaving behind open books, pencil shavings, half-zipped backpacks, and the smell of wet sneakers. I was gathering worksheets from the front desk when Noah approached with his notebook in hand. "Miss Rowan," he said. Could you show me where I went wrong? His voice was low, respectful, steady. I looked at the page. His work was neat, but one sign error had ruined the whole solution. I pulled a chair beside mine and told him to sit. We leaned over the notebook together. Our shoulders were not touching, but they were close enough for me to feel the dangerous awareness of another person's warmth. Here, I said, pointing. You treated the negative like it disappeared. It didn't. He looked where I pointed. Then he looked at me. Not at my face exactly. At the space between us. You explain things like they matter, he said. I remember the silence after that, rain against the window, the heater clicking weakly, my own pulse suddenly louder than either of them. It does matter, I said. He smiled faintly. I know. That should have been the moment I stood up, created distance, ended the conversation, and remembered who I was. Instead, I explained the problem again. Then another. Then we talked for 10 more minutes about books, of all things, because I noticed a worn paperback half hidden in his bag and asked what he was reading. When he left, I sat alone at my desk for a long time, staring at the board without seeing any of it, because something inside me had shifted. Only a little, but enough. That night, I made soup I did not taste, graded tests I did not remember grading, and stood at my kitchen sink long after the dishes were done with my hands resting in cold water. I kept thinking about his voice, not because it was beautiful, because it had looked at me like I was not invisible. It shames me to admit how powerful that felt. By 35, I had become a woman people respected without really seeing. My colleagues called me reliable. The women at the market called me polite. My neighbors called me quiet. Parents shook my hand at school events and thanked me for keeping standards high. Men, when they noticed me at all, noticed me in the harmless way people notice lamps or librarians or women who seem too composed to carry interesting danger. I had not been kissed in 3 years. I had not been wanted. Not really, not openly, not with attention, in even longer. So when Noah looked at me as if my thoughts were worth following, it reached somewhere in me that had been cold for a long time. That is the part no one tells you. Temptation is rarely about beauty alone. Sometimes it begins in loneliness. Weeks passed, then months. Spring softened the town. The maples outside the classroom windows grew greener. Students became lazier as the weather improved. The air in the corridors smelled of grass and pencil wood. Everything should have felt light. Instead, my life became increasingly divided into 2 versions. The version other people saw was ordinary. I taught, I marked exams, I attended staff meetings. I smiled politely in the teacher's lounge and said nothing worth remembering. The other version was made of glances. Noah arriving early and choosing the same seat. Noah staying back with one more question. Noah noticing when I was tired. Noah asking what music I listened to when I graded papers. Noah returning a book I had mentioned and saying, "I think you were right about the ending." We never crossed any obvious line then. Not technically. No hidden touch, no confession, no late-night messages, no kiss. But emotional lines do not need witnesses to be crossed. Sometimes all it takes is anticipation. I began dressing more carefully on the mornings I knew he would have my class. I began hearing his voice in the silence after school. I began dreading weekends because they meant 2 whole days of being nobody to him. That was when I understood I was already in trouble. So I tried to end it before it became something uglier. One Friday, after he stayed again to ask about an assignment he did not truly need help with, I closed his notebook and said, more sharply than I intended, "You don't need extra help. You understand the material." He looked at me quietly. Maybe I stayed for another reason. The air left the room. My mouth went dry. "You should go," I said. He did not move immediately. Then he nodded once, slowly, as if he had expected pain and was only disappointed by its arrival. "All right," he said. He left. I locked the classroom door after him and sat down so suddenly the chair legs scraped the floor. My hands were shaking, because now the thing I had been pretending not to see had a voice. And once desire begins speaking, silence becomes harder to maintain. I spent the weekend determined to recover my senses. I walked by the river, cleaned my apartment, visited my mother, and let her talk to me about tomatoes and church fundraisers and the price of flour. I even convinced myself by Sunday evening that whatever this was had been nothing more than a moment of emotional confusion. Then Monday came. He was there, front row, still, calm, eyes on me. And when I began to teach, I could not remember the order of the proof I had taught every spring for the past 8 years. That frightened me more than anything else. Not because I was in love, because I was losing control. After class, he did not stay. For 2 weeks, he became polite and distant. No extra questions, no waiting, no conversations after the bell. I should have felt relieved. Instead, the absence opened something hollow in me. That was how I knew I was already too far gone. On the third Friday of that distance, it rained hard enough to flood the parking lot behind the science wing. Classes ended early. Students ran shouting through the halls. I carried a stack of exercise books to my car with my coat half buttoned, trying not to slip on the wet steps by the back entrance. My foot went out from under me. For one terrible second, I felt the world tilt. Then a hand caught my elbow. Another steadied my shoulder. Noah. Rain was running through his hair. His jacket was soaked. His face was close enough for me to see the tiny flecks of darker blue around the center of his eyes. "Careful," he said softly. I should have thanked him and stepped away. Instead, I stood there under the cold rain, frozen inside the shape of his hands. "You could have been hurt." The world had narrowed. Rain, his hands, his breath, the stupid wild beating of my heart. Then he lifted one hand very slowly and brushed a wet strand of hair away from my cheek. "You're beautiful," he said. It was the first direct line, the first undeniable crossing. I stepped back from him so quickly I nearly lost my balance again. "Noah?" He dropped his hand immediately. His expression changed, not from desire to shame, but from courage to worry. "I'm sorry," he said. Don't." We stood there in the rain like two people caught in the wrong life. Then I got into my car and drove home with wet hands gripping the steering wheel too hard. That night, I did not sleep at all. I knew with the kind of clarity that leaves no room for self-deception that nothing about this was safe anymore. He was 20. I was 35. I was his teacher. My name could be broken in one sentence if anyone found out. My work, my home, my town, all of it rested on the assumption that I was the kind of woman who would never let this happen. And still, beneath all that fear, one unbearable truth remained. I wanted him. That is the part that destroys people. Not the existence of feeling, the coexistence of feeling and conscience. The next week, I requested that another teacher supervise the end-of-term tutoring sessions. I stopped staying late in my classroom. I kept our conversations clipped and professional. I told myself that if I behaved correctly long enough, the storm inside me would pass. But he waited for me outside the school library one evening after a staff meeting ran late. The courtyard was nearly empty. Sunset was fading into a dull, rose-colored sky. He stood with both hands in his jacket pockets, looking like he had been there a long time. "I need to talk to you." "You shouldn't be here." "I know." "Then why are you?" "Because I'm tired of pretending I imagined this alone." I looked away. He stepped closer, but not so close that anyone passing could accuse us of anything. "I know this is a mess," he said. "I know how it looks. I know what it costs you, but I'm not a child, Eliza." Hearing my first name in his voice almost undid me. "You are my student." "For another 3 months. That does not make this better." I didn't say it did. The honesty of that answer struck me harder than any excuse could have. He was not trying to make it noble, only true. Then he said the line that finally broke the last piece of distance between us. "I would rather lose you honestly than keep pretending I don't feel this." That night, we talked for almost an hour by the locked sports hall while the last light disappeared from the field. He told me he had noticed me from the first day, not because I was pretty, though he said I was, but because I moved through the world like someone always bracing for disappointment. He said I looked lonely in a way that made him want to stand near me. He said I made him feel calmer, sharper, more himself. He said when I explained mathematics, it sounded like certainty was still possible in the world. And I, God help me, told him truths too. That I had not felt alive in years, that I was tired of being composed all the time, that I had tried to stop this before it had a name, that I was afraid, that I did not know how to want something so deeply and still call myself good. When I got home that night, I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "This will ruin you." Then, quietly, I answered myself, "I know." We did not become lovers immediately, not because we were stronger than our feelings, because fear still had enough power to slow desire. But after that night, everything deepened. He was no longer just the bright ache at the edge of my day. He became my secret center. We met outside town first, in places no one from school would go. A small coffee shop by the old highway, a public garden in the next county, a lakeside path 30 minutes away where nobody knew my face. We talked for hours, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. He kissed me for the first time behind a chapel no one used anymore, with wind moving through the pine trees and the sound of distant traffic too far away to matter. It was gentle. That almost made it worse. If it had been rough, selfish, careless, I could have called it a mistake. Instead, it felt like grief turning into warmth. After that, we stopped pretending it wasn't love. The world, of course, noticed before we were ready to admit it. Students see more than adults think. Teachers whisper more than they confess. Small towns survive on unfinished stories. At first, it was nothing direct.
A look from the chemistry teacher in the parking lot. 2 girls in the corridor falling silent when I passed. My principal, Mr. Garrison, asking whether everything was all right because I seemed distracted lately. Then came the coffee shop sighting. Someone's cousin, someone's aunt, a woman from church who told my mother she had seen me with a young man from school. Within a week, the rumor had a body. Within 2 weeks, it had a name. Mine. Mr. Garrison called me into his office on a Tuesday morning. The blinds were half closed. His coffee had gone cold on the desk. He looked not angry at first, but disappointed in the bureaucratic way institutions become disappointed when a scandal threatens paperwork. "There are concerns," he said. My throat tightened. "About your relationship with a student. He is 20. You are his teacher." There was nothing I could say to make the room less true. Parents had complained. 2 board members had called. 1 local paper had already asked for comment. He said words like professional boundaries, public trust, reputational damage, safeguarding. I heard them all. But what I remember most is the moment he folded his hands and asked, very quietly, "Is it true?" There are moments when a lie would save you. I could have denied it. Could have called it gossip. Could have cried and acted insulted. Instead, I nodded. Yes. He closed his eyes briefly, as if the confirmation cost him more than the rumor itself. "Then this is over, Eliza." And just like that, my life split. I left the school building with a cardboard box of books, 2 framed certificates, a half-dead plant, and a letter stating that my employment had ended effective immediately. It was cold outside, though spring had already started. Students watched from windows. 2 mothers in the parking lot stopped talking as I passed. 1 man I had known since childhood looked away as if my face itself had become indecent. By the time I got home, the town knew. By evening, the local paper had a short article online. By morning, my mother was crying at my kitchen table and asking me how I could throw everything away for a boy. A boy. That word followed me like a punishment. Neighbors stared. Friends stopped calling. 1 woman at the market took her basket and moved to another line when she saw me. I became a lesson people used in whispers. This is what happens. This is what she did. This is who she is. For a while, I thought the shame would kill me faster than grief, but Noah stayed. That is the part nobody expected. He stayed when the newspaper ran my name. He stayed when his own father called him disgusting. He stayed when my mother said she would rather not see him. He stayed when the landlord hinted I should consider moving. He stayed when I sat on my kitchen floor and said, "You should go. You can still have a normal life if you go." He knelt beside me and said, "Not if normal means leaving you alone to carry this." He got a job at a hardware store, then another part-time shift at a shipping yard. He worked until his hands were raw. He brought groceries, paid rent when I could not, held me while I cried without saying things like everything happens for a reason, because he was young enough not to insult pain with cliches. One evening, after a man in town spat on the pavement near my shoes and muttered the word pervert under his breath, Noah found me in the dark sitting on the back steps of my apartment. "We have to leave," he said. I looked up at him. He didn't mean for the night. He meant for good. This place is never going to let us breathe. He was right. Small towns forgive theft faster than scandal, and scandal faster than broken rules involving age, power, and desire. To them, our story had only one shape: monster and victim, shame and stain. There was no room for complication, no room for the truth that love had arrived in the wrong place and still been real, no room for the possibility that he had chosen me with clear eyes and I had chosen him knowing exactly what it would destroy. So we left, not dramatically, not under moonlight, not with romance swelling around the edges. We left on a gray morning with 2 suitcases, 3 boxes, and a silence too exhausted to speak much. We drove west until the landscape changed and the air felt less familiar. Found a small town by a lake where no one knew our names. Rented a narrow house with peeling white paint, a soft patch of grass out back, and a kitchen window that caught evening light like honey. The first night there, we ate cheap noodles on the floor because we had no table yet, and for the first time in months, nobody was looking at us. That felt like mercy. Life rebuilt itself slowly, not magically, not cleanly, not all at once. I began tutoring mathematics privately from home. At first, only 1 student, then 3, then 8. Later, I taught adult learners online and discovered something I had not expected. Stripped of institution and reputation, I still knew how to teach. My gift had not belonged to the school. It had belonged to me. Noah enrolled in community college and studied business. He worked mornings, studied afternoons, cooked dinner badly, loved me openly, and spent Sundays building raised garden beds in the yard because I once told him I missed the smell of tomato plants in summer. Sometimes, late at night, I still woke shaking from dreams in which I was back at the school, standing in front of the board while an entire town watched me fail to solve a problem with no correct answer. Sometimes I thought about the students I had left behind and felt grief so sharp it became physical. Sometimes I hated what love had cost me. But never him. Never him. That is what made the whole story hardest to explain to anyone else. I did not ruin my life for a fantasy. I did not lose everything for a passing thrill. I lost everything for something that, against all probability and all public judgment, remained real after the fire. A year after we left, Noah proposed by the lake at sunset. No orchestra. No spectators, no grand speech, just a ring too simple for what it meant, and his voice shaking as he said, "I know what choosing me cost you. I want the rest of my life to be worth it." I said yes before he finished. We married quietly 6 months later in a small church with 2 witnesses who knew nothing about our history and therefore smiled at us with clean, uncomplicated joy. I wore a plain cream dress. He wore a dark suit he could barely afford, and when we stood together in front of the altar, I felt something I had not felt since before the scandal. Not innocence, something better, peace. Years have passed now. Our life is still small by the standards of people who measure success in promotions and public approval. But our house is warm, our garden grows. My students leave my lessons understanding numbers that once terrified them. Noah works in financial planning now and still brings me flowers from the market every Sunday, always different, always chosen like a private language. Some mornings, I wake before him and watch light move across our bedroom wall and think about the woman I used to be. The careful one, the composed one, the woman who believed goodness meant never wanting the wrong thing. I understand her. I miss her sometimes too. But I am not sorry she is gone, because life is crueler and stranger than rules allow. And love, when it comes at the wrong time in the wrong form, does not become less powerful just because people hate the shape of it. Would I advise anyone to choose what I chose? No. Would I tell a teacher to trust desire over judgment? Never. Would I pretend that power, age, and vulnerability do not matter? I would be lying if I did. They matter. They mattered in our story too. I carry that truth with me. But another truth lives beside it. He was not a child. I was not hunting innocence. We were two people who met at the wrong edge of life and loved each other badly at first, then honestly after everything else had burned away. The town we left behind still thinks it knows what happened. Maybe it needs that certainty. People are calmer when stories are simple. Mine is not simple. Mine is not clean. Mine is not something you can fit inside a warning poster or a headline or a whispered judgment over coffee after church. It is a story about loneliness, restraint, shame, loss, devotion, exile, survival, and a love that arrived like a disaster and then refused to die. My name is Eliza Rowan. I was his teacher. I was 35. I was careful. Then he turned 20, and love entered my life wearing the worst possible face. It cost me my job, my town, my reputation, almost my name. But in the silence that came after everyone finished judging us, when only 2 lives remained and one question mattered, stay or leave, he stayed. And so did I. That is the truth. Not the easy truth. Not the safe truth. Just the one I have left.